Hello everyone, welcome to Cashcroft TV. My name is Kalen Ashcroft. Thank you very much for watching and or listening to this episode of Ages of Empires, where we will be going through all the major world empires throughout history. In this important episode, we will be covering the Austro-Hungarian Empire as well as the German Colonial Empire. Furthermore, from each empire we will highlight a specific leader. So from the Austro-Hungarian Empire, we will highlight Emperor Franz Joseph I, and from the German Colonial Empire, we will highlight Kaiser Wilhelm II. So there was a small pause in producing these videos. Life came and sort of affected the progress. However, as long as we're moving in the right direction, I don't think we can control the speed, but we're getting there. So this is the fourth to last episode of this series, episode 69. And once again, to make the list of greatest empires, well, we basically did it based on size. So some empires you might think would have made the list. For example, we squeezed in some Greek city-states, but they were actually much smaller in the grand scheme of things. So if you're wondering why a certain empire wasn't included or why another empire was included, it is basically based on size. So, and at the end of we will cover an empire and a leader from each empire, and at the end we will have a comparison between the two leaders in the style of Plutarch's Parallel Lives. So, to begin with the first empire. So, the rise and fall is the structure. We will be covering all these empires to sort of based on Gibbon's decline and fall of the Roman Empire or Schirer's rise and fall of the Third Reich, but nonetheless to sort of try to extrapolate as to what makes empires succeed and what makes them fail, and maybe we can apply that to modern political science. So the Austro-Hungarian Empire, also referred as the dual monarchy or the Habsburg monarchy, so a very, very famous monarchy throughout history. I'm sure many of you have heard of the Habsburgs, was a multinational constitutional monarchy in Central Europe between the years 1867 to 1918. It was a military and diplomatic alliance, and it consisted of two sovereign states with a single monarch who was titled both Emperor of Austria and King of Hungary. The Austria-Hungary constituted the last phase in the constitutional evolution of the Habsburg monarchy. Once again, a very, very famous monarchical family in European history. And it was formed with the Austro-Hungarian Compromise in 1867 in the aftermath of the Austro-Prussian War, and was dissolved shortly after after Hungary terminated the union with Austria in 1918, as we shall see. So to begin with the origins and formation of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So the Austro-Hungarian Empire, often referred to as the dual monarchy, emerged as a political entity in 1867. Its formation was a response to the rising nationalist tensions within the Austrian Empire, particularly from Hungarian leaders seeking greater autonomy. So it was sort of built to hold things together and prevent the growing nationalism. The Austro-Hungarian Compromise in 1867 split the empire into two semi-independent entities, so nonetheless a compromise as titled. And in 1867 it was split into two semi-independent entities. Austria and Hungary united, however, under a single monarchy, the Emperor of Austria and the King of Hungary simultaneously. Emperor Franz Joseph I, who ruled as Emperor of Austria and King of Hungary, so he is the leader. Also, we will highlight in a specific biography, was the first to hold this position of dual monarch. The arrangement allowed both regions to maintain separate governments, parliaments, and policies, but they shared common ministries for foreign affairs and defense and finance. So in some ways like a federal government, where some powers are given to the federal government and some are given to the constituent states, as we have, for example, in Canada or the United States, and as we've covered many throughout history as well. The arrangement allowed both to maintain separate governments, once again parliaments and policies, but they shared foreign affairs, defense, and finance. This dual structure was designed to placate Hungarian demands while maintaining cohesion of a vast multi-ethnic empire that included Germans, Hungarians, Czechs, Slovaks, Poles, Ukrainians, Croats or Croatians, Serbians, Romanians, Italians, and many others as well. So a very multi-ethnic area of land or group of people that was ruled by this, starting with this Franz Joseph I, whom we will highlight in a specific biography soon. So as for the expansion and influence, so the incline of this empire, so throughout the 19th century, the Austro-Hungarian Empire solidified its position as a significant power. Its economy grew rapidly, spurred by industrialization and infrastructural development, such as railways connecting its diverse regions. So in many ways, to rule over such a large area of land, it was very much facilitated by the growth in technologies, particularly railroads. Cities like Vienna, Budapest, Prague, Lviv became centers of culture, science, and industry. The empire played a key role as well in European geopolitics, especially in the Balkans, where it sought to counter the influence of the Ottoman Empire, one of the largest empires in history, as we have covered, and later Russia as well. Its annexation of Bosnia and Herzegovina in 1908 underlined its ambitions, but also exacerbated tensions with Serbia, a rising Balkan power. As for challenges and internal strife, which are very common causes of decline across all the empires we have covered so far, and in the final few remaining empires we will cover as well. Despite its economic and cultural achievements, the Austro-Hungarian Empire faced persistent challenges, such as ethnic nationalism, where the empire's multi-ethnic composition was both its strength and its Achilles heel. While it managed to maintain a degree of stability, various ethnic groups inspired by a wave of nationalism sweeping across Europe demanded greater autonomy and independence. So perhaps one of the reasons it was created in the first place was to counteract this growing nationalism or efforts to achieve autonomy was also one of its causes for decline. So perhaps it was only created to counterbalance this inevitable force of nationalism caused by this multi-ethnic groups. As for further political complexity, so the dual monarchy's governance structure was cumbersome. The Austrian and Hungarian governments often clashed over policies, and the exclusion of Slavic groups from significant political power created further resentment. So the Austrians and the Hungarians had powers, but they often clashed, and those who had lesser powers, such as the Serbians, were also felt they were being left out. Furthermore, military weakness. So while the empire maintained a sizable military, its forces were often outdated and divided along ethnic lines, which undermined cohesion and effectiveness, not to mention language barriers, for example. And as for the road to war, so the early 20th century brought growing instability to the Balkans, where the Austro-Hungarian Empire faced increasing competition from Serbia and Russia. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne in Sarajevo on June 28, 1914, by a Bosnian Serb nationalist, set off a chain of events that plunged Europe into the First World War. So a very, very important event was marked by the assassination of the leader of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, or the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who was heir to the throne, leading up to World War I and the eventual collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So the Austro-Hungarian Empire entered World War I as part of the Central Powers allied with Germany, the Ottoman Empire, and Bulgaria. However, its military performance was poor, and it relied heavily on German support. The war exacerbated internal divisions, and various ethnic groups within the empire grew increasingly disillusioned with the monarchy. By 1918, the empire was on the brink of collapse, and the strain of the war, coupled with food shortages, also caused by the wars, but also internal struggles as well, economic hardships and widespread dissent, led uprisings across the territories. As the Central Powers faced defeat, ethnic groups declared independence, and the empire ultimately disintegrated in 1918 at the end of the First World War. So as for the aftermath and legacy of this very important empire and as well monarchy, the Treaty of Saint-Germain in 1919 and the Treaty of Trianon in 1920 formalized the dissolution of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Its territories were divided among the new or expanded states, including Austria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Poland, and Romania. Austria and Hungary were left as small landlocked nations, while the empire's former subjects grappled with challenges of nation building. So much was left in the ruins post the war, but also post the collapse of this significant empire. The legacy, therefore, of the Austro-Hungarian Empire is complex. It is remembered for its contributions, including its works of composers such as Gustav Mahler and writers like Franz Kafka, who wrote many great books such as The Stranger or The Fall. And it also left a lasting imprint on European geopolitics, as its collapse reshaped the map of Central Europe, Eastern Europe, and set the stage for future conflicts, including World War II. To this date, for example, Austria and Hungary are two distinct nations. Perhaps if this empire never collapsed, maybe they would have been united as well as many of the other constituent states and peoples within the empire. Or perhaps this empire was only created through the result of their growing separation. So perhaps it was just a short-lived phenomenon as well. So, as to highlight a specific leader, we have Franz Joseph I, who was also the first leader of both Hungary and Austria. So Franz Joseph I, or Francis Joseph I, was born on the 18th of August 1830, which is 15 days after my birthday, but many, many years before, if anyone believes in horoscopes. And he died on the 21st of November 1916 during the midst of the First World War. And he was Emperor of Austria, King of Hungary, and ruler of the other states of the Habsburg monarchy, so from a very important royal family. From the 2nd of December 1848 until his death in 1916. In the early part of his reign, his realms and territories were referred to as the Austrian Empire, but were reconstituted as the dual monarchy in the Austro-Hungarian Empire from 1867. From the 1st of May 1815 to the 24th of August 1866, he was also president of the German Confederation as well. So, as for a biography of the life of Franz Joseph I, the important leader of the Habsburg monarchy. So from 1830 to 1916, for the early life and ascension to the throne. Franz Joseph I, perhaps the most significant leader of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, was once again born on the 18th of August 1830 in the Schönbrunn Palace in Vienna. He was the eldest son of Archduke Franz Karl and Princess Sophie of Bavaria. From an early age, he was groomed for leadership, coming from being the heir to the throne of the Habsburg monarchy, receiving strict education, emphasizing discipline, loyalty to the Habsburg dynasty, and as well education in statescraft, which he would soon apply after he ascended to the throne. Franz Joseph ascended to the throne of the Austrian Empire at the young age of 18 years old, following the abdication of his uncle, Emperor Ferdinand I, during the Revolution of 1848, which shook much of Europe. His rise to power marked the beginning of a reign that would span nearly 7 decades, one of the longest in European history. So he pretty much encompassed the entirety of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, living a very long time, not only for this empire itself or even the respective states, but also leaders generally, for 70 years, or 7 decades, pardon me. As for his early reign, nearly 7 decades, however. As for his early reign, starting with challenges and reforms. So Franz Joseph's early years as emperor were marked by efforts to stabilize the empire after the upheaval of 1848. With the support of Prince Felix Schwarzenberg, he reasserted Habsburg authority through military force and centralized governance. So a very common theme on the incline of the rise of empires is a movement towards centralization. The introduction of the 1851 Sylvester Patents abolished the liberal constitution granted during the revolutions, establishing a neo-absolutist regime, so centralization through absolutism. However, the empire's defeat in the Austro-Prussian War of 1866 marked a turning point. Austria was forced to cede its influence over German affairs to Prussia and withdraw from the German Confederation. This loss underscored the empire's vulnerabilities and paved the way for internal reforms. As for the Austro-Hungarian Compromise in 1867, where he would gain control over Hungary as well, one of Franz Joseph's most defining achievements was the Austro-Hungarian Compromise in 1867, which created the dual monarchy of Austria-Hungary. Pressured by Hungarian nationalists and the need to maintain the empire's stability, Franz Joseph agreed to grant Hungary equal status within the monarchy. This agreement, though controversial, provided a temporary solution to the empire's ethnic tensions and ensured its survival for another half-century. So an interesting play. Rather than outright conquering, for example, or ruling over the Hungarians, they made a dual monarchy by becoming king of Hungary, and in some ways put them on an equal status, unlike, for example, as we discussed, the Serbians, who were not necessarily on the same footing as the Austrians and the Hungarians under this leadership. Furthermore, as the Emperor of both Austria and King of Hungary, Franz Joseph presided over a complex and diverse empire that included numerous ethnic groups, each with its own aspirations and grievances, so making it a difficult region and empire to rule over. His leadership was often seen as a unifying force, however, in an otherwise fractious realm, but perhaps his position itself was formed through compromise. As for his personal life and tragedies, Franz Joseph's personal life was marked with a series of tragedies that added a somber dimension to his long reign. In 1854, he married Elizabeth of Bavaria, known as Sisi, a charismatic but unconventional empress. Their relationship was strained by court policies and Sisi's disdain for the rigid Habsburg court. Some marital problems, for example. The emperor endured several personal losses, including the suicide of his only son and heir, Crown Prince Rudolf, at Mayerling in 1889, an event that shook the empire. So the suicide of one's own son is, even if it wasn't his responsibility, it was hard to not feel somewhat regretful or some degree of responsibility for such a loss. This also was followed by the assassination of Empress Elizabeth in 1898, and the assassination of his nephew as well, and heir presumptive Archduke Franz Ferdinand in 1914, which started the First World War. So 2 assassinations and the suicide within his family, and also much hardships despite his significant rise to power and significant position. As for World War I and his final years, the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, his nephew, in Sarajevo precipitated World War I, a conflict that would ultimately lead to the dissolution of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. By this time, Franz Joseph was 84 years old and physically frail, having gone through much as well, but still holding on, at least for a bit. Although he formally declared war on Serbia, thus beginning the First World War, he played a diminished role in the conflict of the war, leaving much of the decision-making to the ministers and military leaders. Therefore, Franz Joseph I died on November 21st, 1916, during the midst of the First World War, during the second year, but third as well, depending on how we count it, of the First World War. The First World War is from 1914 to 1918, and he died on 1916. His death marked the end of an era of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which disintegrated just 2 years later. As for, however, the legacy of this important leader, Franz Joseph I is remembered as a symbol of continuity and stability during one of the most turbulent periods of European history. His reign saw the transformation of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire into the Austro-Hungarian Empire, dual monarchy, the rise of nationalism, and the challenges of modernity. While critics argue that his conservative policies delayed necessary reforms, his personal dedication to duty and his role in maintaining unity in a vast and diverse empire are undeniable. His legacy endures as a complex figure who embodied both strength and weakness within his empire. So very much manifested both the rise and fall of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, having lived through almost the entirety, or ruled over essentially the entirety of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So that is the life of the very important Franz Joseph I and the brief history of the rise and fall of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. As for the content of the slide, so first, for information, the title of the slide, we have Franz Joseph I and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, also known as the dual monarchy or the Habsburg monarchy. It was a multinational constitutional monarchy in Central Europe with a single monarch titled both Emperor of Austria and King of Hungary. Significant leader was Emperor Franz Joseph I. The empire, once again, was Austro-Hungarian Empire. The period was from 1867 to 1918, Common Era, the period known as New Imperialism, up until World War I. Modern locations included Austria, Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Croatia, Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Slovenia, Romania, Italy, Poland, Ukraine, and Montenegro. Those names have since, the current names, however, those names, please note, were different at the time. They were encompassed in whole or in part by under the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Million square kilometers would be 0.62. Million square miles equivalent would be 0.24, making it be placed on the list of largest empires, and percent of the world would be 0.46. So, however, our average empire size of our largest empires is 1.14, so a little bit smaller than average, but nonetheless a very difficult and multi-ethnic empire to rule over, and also a very developed region to rule over as well. Once again, percent of the world, excluding Antarctica, would be 0.46%, so almost 0.5% of the entire land mass of the Earth. Capital was both Vienna in Austria and Budapest in Hungary. I've been fortunate to visit Vienna in Austria, but I'm grateful to visit Budapest as well in Hungary. The government was a constitutional monarchy. Common languages included German, Hungarian, Croatian, Czech, Polish, Ruthenian, Romanian, Bosnian, Serbian, Slovak, Slovene, Italian, Romani, Yiddish, and others. So it was very multi-ethnic and multilingual region. The religion was predominantly Catholic, 76.6%. Protestant was 8.9%. 8.7% were Eastern Orthodox, 4.4% were Jewish, and 1.3% were Muslim. Population in 1910, just before the First World War, or 4 years before the First World War, was 51,390,223, so likely the peak population as well, given the technological advances. But nonetheless, there were also economic struggles, so it is possible it might have been slightly higher in the years preceding. As for images, we have in the top left an image of Franz Joseph himself in uniform of a Hungarian field marshal, showing the duality of being both the Emperor of Austria but King of Hungary, so therefore wearing a Hungarian field marshal outfit in circa, meaning approximately 1892 CE. To the right of that, we have the coat of arms of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. As you can see, some very important imagery. I would suggest taking a closer look at it to sort of elucidate some of firstly, the dual monarchy, as we can see both crowns, but also some of the important imagery of the two empires, but also their respective regions. To the right of that, we have the Habsburg flag, the flag of the Habsburg monarchy, the famous black and yellow, or black and gold. To the right of that, we have to the far right, we have the map of the Austro-Hungarian Empire on the eve of the 1914 First World War, so showing it at its greatest territorial extent, showing, for example, from Austria to Hungary and all the way up into to Russia, who they contested with, to contesting with the Serbians as well, but a very, very large mass of almost 0.5% of the entire landmass of the world, but also a very multi-ethnic region. As well, further images we have in this image here showing Franz Joseph I and Wilhelm II with military commanders during World War I. Wilhelm II we will also highlight in our coming episode, coming empire and biography. Below that, we have a large military vehicle, the MAVAG armored train in 1914. So very much showing how much we moved through time to the extent we have not only trains but armored trains used for military endeavors. To the left of that, we have the Austrian Parliament building, a very beautiful building in a very, very beautiful city as well, off of Vienna. To the right of that, we have the Hungarian Parliament building, a very massive building I'd be grateful to visit someday. And in the bottom, we have the crowds and streets in the aftermath of the anti-Serb riots in Sarajevo in the 29th of June 1914, which sparked the very important World War I. As for some last specific important dates, in 1867, the 1867 compromise was in the 30th of March 1867. The Dual Alliance was formed on the 7th of October 1879. The Bosnian crisis was on the 6th of October 1908. The July crisis was on the 28th of June 1914. The invasion of Serbia was on the 28th of July 1914. The empire was dissolved on the 31st of October 1918. The Austrian Republic was formed in the 12th of November 1918, showing the separation and the formation of a new state, the Austrian Republic. The Hungarian Republic was formed on the 16th of November 1918. The Treaty of Saint-Germain was on the 10th of September 1919, and the Treaty of Trianon was on the 4th of June 1920, formally dissolving the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So that is, in my opinion, the very important Franz Joseph I and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and we will highlight the empire and leader more respectively in the comparison following the German Colonial Empire. So just a caveat here, of course the German Empire also existed, but since we're basing things off greatest territorial extent, the German Colonial Empire would be even larger than the German Empire because it has all the colonial territories as well. But we will also discuss in part and indirectly and in some ways directly as well, the German Empire as well in this episode. So the German Colonial Empire constituted the overseas colonies, dependencies, and territories of the German Empire. It was unified in 1871 The Chancellor of the time period was Otto von Bismarck, one of the great statesmen in all history, for better or for worse, at least a very great amalgamator. It had lived attempts at colonization by individual German states had occurred in preceding centuries, but Bismarck resisted pressure to construct a colonial empire until the scramble of Africa had occurred in 1884, starting the beginning of the colonial endeavors of the German Empire. Claiming much of the remaining uncolonized areas of Africa, there's a great book by Michael Doyle called Empires, which highlights the scramble of Africa after the British and French as well were also involved in, for example, the scramble of Africa, and they became the third largest colonial empire. So we've highlighted some very important colonial empires: Portuguese, Spanish, French colonial empire, British as well to come, but the German was the third largest colonial empire of all time. Claiming much of the remaining uncolonized territories, Germany built the third largest colonial empire at the time, after the British and French, as mentioned. The German colonial empire furthermore encompassed parts of several African countries, including parts of present-day Burundi, Rwanda, Tanzania, Namibia, Cameroon, Gabon, Congo, Central African Republic, Chad, Nigeria, Togo, Ghana, as well as northeastern New Guinea, Samoa, and numerous Micronesian islands. So this is sort of, I guess, the manifestation of the German Empire, where it becomes a colonial empire as well. So like many of the previous empires, we cannot cover the whole German history in one episode, so we sort of highlight a pinnacle period, which was the German colonial empire, and indirectly we'll hopefully cover a little bit about Bismarck too, who amalgamated the German states to form the German Empire, essentially. So as for the origins of German colonialism, Germany's colonial empire was a relatively short-lived compared to those of Britain, France, or Spain. However, it became larger than the Spanish colonial empire, but its rise was deeply entwined with the unification of Germany in 1871 under Otto von Bismarck. So very important date. Otto von Bismarck unified Germany in 1871. For much of the 19th century, German states showed little interest in overseas expansion, focusing instead on European affairs. However, the industrial boom following unification and the European scramble for Africa inspired German elites to seek colonies as sources of raw materials, markets, and prestige. So Otto von Bismarck particularly was focused more on the continental Europe. However, after these forces caused it to become a colonial empire, marking perhaps the greatest prestige of the German Empire after its original unification. Colonial ambitions gained momentum under Kaiser Wilhelm I and later Kaiser Wilhelm II, whom we will highlight in a specific biography. And influential groups such as the Pan-German League and the German Colonial Society pushed for overseas expansion. By the 1880s, Germany began acquiring territories despite Bismarck's initial skepticism about the economic value of colonies. So, as for the formation of the empire from 1884 to 1885, so Germany's colonial empire formally began during the Berlin Conference in 1884 to 1885, organized by Bismarck to regulate European colonization in Africa, so ceding to accepting that colonial ambitions were worthy of focus. This conference granted Germany international recognition for its territorial claims, including German East Africa, which is in modern-day Tanzania, Rwanda, and Burundi, German Southwest Africa, which is in modern-day Namibia, Cameroon, which is in modern-day Cameroon, Togoland, which is in modern-day Togo and parts of Ghana. In addition to African colonies, Germany also established territories in the Pacific, such as German New Guinea, the Bismarck Archipelago, the Marshall Islands, the Caroline Islands, Palau, and Marina Islands acquired from Spain in 1899. So, both in Oceania as well as in Africa. As for governance and development, Germany's colonial administration emphasized economic exploitation. Plantations, mining operations, and trade routes were developed, often using forced labors and oppressive policies. However, it must be noted the other colonial empires were also engaged in similar activities. While the empire was lauded at home as a symbol of national pride, the reality for many indigenous populations was harsh. As for colonial rule, was marked by frequent uprisings such as the Herero and Namakua genocide in 1904 to 1908 in German Southwest Africa, where tens of thousands of Herero and Nama people were killed or driven into the desert to die. As well, the Maji-Maji rebellion in 1905 to 1907 in German East Africa, where brutal suppression led to the deaths of up to 300,000 people. So very, very rough treatment of some of the indigenous populations under the German colonial empire. These atrocities were condemned internationally, tarnishing Germany's colonial reputation and fostering resistance within the colonies. As for decline and fall of the German colonial empire, so Germany's colonial empire was a victim of its geopolitical ambitions in Europe. Unlike Britain and France, Germany lacked the naval dominance and resources to defend its overseas territories effectively during the major conflicts, particularly in the First World War. When World War I broke out, as mentioned in the preceding part of this episode in 1914, after the assassination of the heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Germany's colonies became easy targets for Allied forces, as Germany, although they had these colonial regions, they did not have the navy to support them. And therefore, they became easy targets for the Allied forces. For example, German Togoland fell to British and French forces within weeks after the outbreak of the First World War. German Southwest Africa was conquered by South African troops in 1915. German East Africa resisted under the leadership of General Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck, but by 1918, at the end of the war, it too was defeated. Germany's Pacific colonies, furthermore, were seized by Japan and Australia. Interestingly, Japan would come to be Germany's ally under the Nazi Empire. By the war's end in 1918, Germany had lost all its colonies. As for the aftermath and legacies, the Treaty of Versailles in 1919 formally stripped Germany of its colonial possessions. These territories were redistributed as League of Nations mandates to Allied powers. Britain and France took most of the African colonies. Japan and Australia gained control of German Pacific territories. Despite their short tenure, Germany's colonial ventures had lasting effects. They contributed to the exploitation and upheaval of indigenous population, setting the momentum for continued rule after they were conquered by other peoples, for example. Exploitation and upheaval of indigenous populations disrupted traditional societies and set the stage for future struggles for independence in Africa and the Pacific, despite ultimately the German Empire's loss of control. As for the legacy and historical impact, so Germany's colonial empire left a lasting controversial legacy. On the one hand, it reflected the broader trends of European imperialism during the late 19th century. On the other hand, its brutal methods, particularly in the Herero and Namaqua genocide, highlighted the darker side of colonialism and foreshadowed the racial ideologies that would emerge more fully during the Nazi era. In modern Germany, the colonial period has been the subject of renewed scrutiny, with efforts to acknowledge the historical injustices and engage with the descendants of those affected by the German imperial rule. Monuments, museums, and academic research now reflect a growing awareness of this complex chapter in German history. So perhaps it was the Nazi regime, it was a continuation of, in some ways, some of the aspirations of the German colonial empire. So, as to highlight a specific and important leader of the German colonial empire, a very significant, the third largest colonial empire of all time. So, Kaiser Wilhelm II, also known as Frederick Wilhelm Victor Albert, was born on the 27th of January 1859 and died on the 4th of June 1941, and was the last German emperor and king of Prussia from 1888 until his abdication in 1918 at the end of the First World War, which marked the end of the German Empire as well as the Hohenzollern dynasty, 300-year rule of Prussia. So the Hohenzollern and the Habsburgs were probably the two most significant Germanic-like monarchies in Europe. The Hohenzollern, I always struggle with that word, and the Habsburgs. But the Hohenzollern was the dynasty to which Wilhelm II ruled from and ruled over the German Empire and German colonial empire. So as for his early life, Wilhelm II, born Frederick Wilhelm Victor Albert on January 27, 1859, at the Kronprinzen Palace in Berlin, was the eldest grandchild of Queen Victoria of the United Kingdom and the future German Emperor Wilhelm I, so also having English roots. He was born with a withered left arm due to traumatic birth injury, and Wilhelm grew up under intense scrutiny, which shaped his desire to project strength and authority. So, very significant family, but also with great power comes great responsibility, as said in, for example, Spider-Man. He was educated in military and classical studies, befitting the eldest child of heir to the throne, and Wilhelm developed a strong sense of nationalism and interest in military strategy, science, and industry. These influences would later inform his approach to governance and foreign policy. As for his ascension to the throne, Wilhelm became German Emperor and King of Prussia in 1888, following the death of his father, Frederick III, who reigned for only 99 days. Unlike his predecessors, however, Wilhelm sought to expand Germany's influence beyond Europe and make it a global power. As for his vision for a colonial empire, under Wilhelm II, Germany pursued an aggressive policy of colonial expansion. Although German colonies had been acquired before his reign, Wilhelm's leadership gave them new emphasis. He envisioned Germany as a global imperial power to rival Britain and France, coining the phrase a place in the sun to express his ambition. So expanding his powers beyond just Europe. Although the regions had very much already been conquered, he had a greater or more significant emphasis on the colonial ambitions of the empire. Wilhelm's tenure was marked by significant efforts to develop Germany's territorial colonies, or the German Empire's territorial colonies. As for his infrastructure and economic projects, for example, he built railways, plantations, and trade networks were established in Africa and the Pacific. As for naval expansion, Wilhelm's obsession with building a powerful navy supported his imperial goals and reflected his rivalry with Britain. Perhaps he should have done more so if they had have been more successful in World War I if they wanted to maintain their colonies, because despite his efforts, their navy was still inferior to Britain at the start of the First World War and lost many of its territories right at its outset. The Kiel Canal, furthermore, was expanded to connect the North Sea with the Baltics, improving Germany's naval mobility. Despite these developments, however, Wilhelm's administration struggled with the realities of colonial governance, including resistance from indigenous populations and international criticism of Germany's harsh methods. As for his controversial leadership, Wilhelm's leadership style was often impulsive and erratic, leading to several diplomatic military blunders that undermined the empire's stability and his own personal control. Notable events during his reign included the Herero and Namakua genocide, as mentioned, where Wilhelm sanctioned brutal methods to suppress resistance in German Southwest Africa, resulting in one of the first genocides of the 20th century. As well, the Maji-Maji Rebellion, his administration's harsh response to uprisings in German East Africa, caused widespread famine and death. Wilhelm's rhetoric and policies increasingly alienated Germany from exacerbating tensions that would lead to World War I. So perhaps if he had not done these things, perhaps the Allied powers or the Western powers would have been more, maybe could have at least slowed down the developments of the First World War, but instead he seemed to have maybe upset them. As for decline and exile, so with World War I was the ultimate test of Wilhelm's leadership. His inability to manage military strategy effectively, coupled with his erratic decision-making, contributed to Germany's defeat, although he lived through the war. As Germany's colonies fell to Allied forces during the war, Wilhelm's vision for a global empire crumbled. By the war's end in 1918, public dissatisfaction with his rule reached a boiling point, and the German Revolution forced Wilhelm to abdicate on November 9, 1918. So he lived through the war, however, and then he therefore fled to the Netherlands, where he lived in exile in Huisdoorn, or Doorn House, for the rest of his life. So despite losing the war and perhaps causing many atrocities, he nonetheless lived through the war and lived the rest of his life in exile, somewhat perhaps like a Napoleon figure, who ultimately died in exile. As for his final years and death, not to say necessarily there are many comparisons between Napoleon and Wilhelm II, but nonetheless they both died in exile after the fall of their respective empires. As for his final years and death in exile, Wilhelm remained politically isolated, writing memoirs and defending his reign. He expressed bitterness over the collapse of the German Empire and blamed others for Germany's defeat and loss of its colonies. Wilhelm died on the 4th of June 1941 in the Netherlands during the World War II. So he lived up until the Second World War as well, and his death marked the end of the controversial and polarizing life. Interesting to note, I just finished rise and fall of the Third Reich by Scherer. And it's interesting maybe to contrast this, where Adolf Hitler took his own life after losing the war, whereas Wilhelm II continued living and continued justifying his reign, and even lived until the Second World War. So different ends of the lives of the leaders of these respective empires. As for his final years and death, cover that. As for his legacy, Wilhelm II's reign is often seen as a cautionary tale of overambition and mismanagement. While he succeeded in projecting Germany as a global power, his leadership also sowed the seeds for its downfall, and perhaps created enemies or a bad image for the German colonial empire at a poor time. In the context of German colonialism, Wilhelm's tenure highlighted the tensions between imperial ambitions and the practical realities of managing a diverse and often resistant colonies. His legacy is further tarnished by the atrocities committed under his rule, which remain a dark chapter in Germany's history, perhaps only overshadowed by those under Nazi Germany, which we will cover soon. Despite his flaws, Wilhelm's reign was pivotal in shaping the trajectory of modern German history and its complex relationship with colonialism and global power dynamics. So that is the fascinating and nuanced life of Kaiser Wilhelm II and the German colonial empire, through which he lived to see the end of, and even into the Nazi Empire as well. So as for images in the top left, content first. So as for the title, we have Wilhelm II and the German Colonial Empire. It was overseas colonies, dependencies, and territories of the German Empire. It was the third largest colonial empire at the time and after the British and French empires, however. Significant leader we highlighted was Kaiser Wilhelm II. The empire was the German Colonial Empire. The period was from 1884 to 1920. Common Era, also during the New Imperialism period to the World War I. Modern locations included Germany, Namibia, Tanzania, Cameroon, Togo, Rwanda, Burundi, Papua New Guinea, Marshall Islands, Caroline Islands, Marina Islands, China, and Samoa. Million square kilometers would be 3.147, so larger than our average largest empire, which would be 1.14, putting it as the third largest colonial empire, only surpassed by the British and French. Million square miles equivalent would be 1.215. Percent of the world would be 2.34%, excluding Antarctica, so a very large proportion of the land mass of the Earth. Capital was Berlin, a city I've been fortunate to visit. However, it is a very busy city, I would say, today, and very different from that time because much of it had been bombed during the Second World War. Government was a constitutional monarchy. Common languages included German, Swahili, Rwanda, Urundi, Papuan, and Samoan. Religion was predominantly Protestant, so we'll contrast that with the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which was predominantly Catholic at 62.63%, Roman Catholic at 35.89%, Judaism 1.24%, 0.17% was other Christian, and 0.07% was other religions generally. Population was about 70 million at its peak. Images in the top left, we have Wilhelm II in his military attire. To the right of that, we have the coat of arms, as we can see the famous eagle of Germany. And to the right of that, we have the flag of the German Colonial Empire, or the German Empire more broadly, which has the coat of arms in the center with the famous black, white, and red horizontal stripes. To the right of that, we have an image of Chancellor Otto von Bismarck in 1890, who united the states of Germany, forming the German Empire. However, he himself was Chancellor, whereas Wilhelm II, for example, was a Kaiser, so different roles. As to the right of that, we had Die Proklamation, or the Proklamation des Deutschen Kaiserreichs by Anton von Werner in 1877, depicting the proclamation of Emperor Wilhelm I on 18th of January 1871. Pardon me for my German pronunciation. However, I endeavor to improve my German, which is presently quite minimal, but every day improving, in the Palace of Versailles. So proclaiming Wilhelm II Emperor of the German Colonial Empire, or German Empire, or Kaiser. Below that, as well, in images from the left, we have on the podium in black the Crown Prince Frederick, later Frederick III, his father, the Emperor, and Frederick I of Baden, proposing to toast to the new emperor. At the center in white, we have Otto von Bismarck, right there. And as well, we have at the center in white, Otto von Bismarck, first Chancellor of Germany. Helmuth von Moltke, the elder, Prussian Chief of Staff as well, are also featured in that image. I recommend looking at another important event to take place in Versailles. Below that, we have Berlin Palace, the main residence of the House of Hohenzollern, the royal family of the German Empire. Contrast that with the Habsburgs of the Austrian Empire, and later Austro-Hungarian Empire, which we also covered in this episode. So great, significant site. And below that, we have Bismarck and Pope Pius the Ninth, between Berlin and Rome, image depicting them playing chess, produced in 1875, manifesting or evidencing the tensions between Germany and the Catholic Church through them battling through a game of chess, because as we have seen throughout history that Germany, through the Protestant Reformation, such as Martin Luther, formed Protestantism, which was later mirrored by Henry VIII, which also founded Protestantism in England. And to the right and below that, we have the Krupp works in Essen in 1890. Essen is close to Cologne. Essen, I believe, means to eat, in fact, or food. But nonetheless, it's showing the industrial prowess of Germany, and just generally how far through history we have moved. There we have these big factories now, and empires have very much changed from for example, Egyptian empires, which we covered nearing the beginning of this series. The German colonial empire was preceded by the North German Confederation, Bavaria, Württemberg, Baden, Hesse, and as well the many constituent colonial acquisitions of the empire. However, after the fall of the German colonial empire, the German empire more broadly formed the Weimar Republic, the Melmel territory, the territory of Saar-Bazen, Danzig, and the Second Polish Republic. In the top right, we have a map of the German colonial empire. So here was the European German empire, but then their colonial acquisitions, for example, West Africa, South African regions, as well as East Africa. So quite a patchy controlled territories in Africa, sort of quite disparate, but all on the coast, showing how they, of course, got there. And as well in Oceania, very significant territories as well, that would later be taken by, for example, the Japanese, who would become, in part, one of their allies in the Nazi Empire, which we will cover in a coming episode. As for some significant dates, the unification of the German Empire was on the 18th of January, 1871. The Constitution was formed in the 16th of April, 1871. There's an important passage, or at least it stuck out to me, in Alexis de Tocqueville's The Democracy in America, or it might have been On the Regime and the Old Revolution, the Old Regime by Alexis de Tocqueville. It might have been one of the two books. Nonetheless, it said that the German Constitution, or German civil code, is longer than the French and therefore more authoritarian. A broad observation, but something I've been fascinated in. I think the longer the civil code, perhaps the more authoritarian. Perhaps one of the causes of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire was excessive legalism. So the more laws one makes, or the more perhaps the more control the people are under. But nonetheless, the Constitution was written and formed for the German Empire in the 16th of April, 1871, which may or may not have been more authoritarian than the French. The Berlin Conference was on the 15th of November, 1884. The World War I began on the 28th of July in 1914, as highlighted, for example, in the assassination discussed in our discussion in the Austro-Hungarian Empire previously in this episode. The German Revolution was on the 3rd of November, 1918. The abdication of the Kaiser Wilhelm II, was on the 9th of November, 1918. The armistice was signed on the 19th of November 1918. I was just saying they'll put down arms and stop fighting, and the Weimar Constitution was formed on the 11th of August 1919. So that is the very fascinating and important German Empire, and more broadly German colonial empire, and Wilhelm II, the important leader who saw it to and beyond its end and up until the Second World War. So as for a comparison in the style of Plutarch's Parallel Lives, to hopefully learn a bit more about what I think many leaders have many similarities, but why are they different is what really makes them perhaps unique, but also hopefully to learn a bit more about their respective empires. So comparison between Emperor Franz Joseph I of Austria-Hungary, and Kaiser Wilhelm II of the German Empire, or German Colonial Empire. So Emperor Franz Joseph I of the Austria-Hungary and Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany were two of the most prominent European monarchs of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Both ruled during transformative and turbulent periods in European history, and they happen to overlap chronologically, but their leadership styles, political contexts, and legacies differed significantly. Therefore, we will seek to compare them here. So, as for their background and context, so Franz Joseph I ruled the Austro-Hungarian Empire from 1848 to 1916. He ascended to the throne during the Revolution of 1848, which were part of a wave of nationalist uprisings across Europe. He presided over a diverse, multi-ethnic empire struggling with internal division and the rise of nationalist movements. As for Wilhelm II, he ruled over the German Empire from 1888, so coming to power later, until 1918, so but ruling for 2 years longer, and living much longer because he did not die during the war. He lived on even until the Second World War in exile. He inherited a newly unified and powerful Germany established by Otto von Bismarck. So Emperor Franz Joseph I was the first to be King of Hungary as well as Emperor of Austria, whereas Kaiser Wilhelm II largely gained his state, ascended to the throne fully formed. And he, Wilhelm II, oversaw Germany's transformation into an industrial and military powerhouse, but also contributed to its international isolation and downfall. As for the leadership styles, Franz Joseph I was known for his conservatism and dedication to duty. He maintained a rigid autocratic style of governance, emphasizing loyalty to the Habsburg monarchy. He focused on balancing competing interests of the empire's various ethnic groups, particularly of the Austro-Hungarian Compromise of 1867, which granted significant autonomy to Hungary. And he furthermore avoided radical reforms, which sometimes left the empire ill-prepared for modern challenges, so perhaps maybe overly conservative, maybe not taking enough action. As for Wilhelm II, he was impulsive and unpredictable, often prioritizing personal ambition over careful diplomacy. He dismissed Bismarck in 1890, who united the German Empire, and pursued a more aggressive foreign policy, including colonial expansion and naval armament, such as the Tirpitz Plan. He favored showmanship and grand gestures, which alienated Germany's allies and exacerbated tensions with other powers. He played a controversial role in World War I, often seen as indecisive and ineffective. So quite different characters, but ultimately leading to perhaps similar fates within their empires despite different approaches. As for their respective achievements and challenges, Franz Joseph I successfully held together a fragile and diverse empire for nearly 68 years. The dual monarchy structure established in 1867 gave Hungary autonomy while maintaining unity, postponing the empire's ultimate collapse. So perhaps it was just a phenomenon to hold them together temporarily despite the trend for separation. His reign saw industrialization and modernization, though they were unevenly distributed across the empire. For example, recall the armored train, for example, image we saw, but unevenly across the territories. He struggled furthermore with nationalist uprisings, economic inequality, and the assassination of his heir, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, which precipitated World War I. but perhaps he could not have avoided that, but maybe they did not need to go to war, but it was pretty big. There was also other assassinations within his family too, but not to mention he also had his own son committed suicide, so he was going through a lot of tragedy. As for Wilhelm II, he oversaw Germany's rise as a global power with a vast colonial empire in Africa and the Pacific. He expanded the military and navy, challenging Britain's dominance but provoking rivalries. But perhaps if he expanded his navy even more so, maybe they would have been more successful in the war. Or maybe if he did not at all, maybe the war might not have precipitated. Furthermore, he failed to manage international relations, leading to Germany's isolation and contributing to the outbreak of World War I. His abdication in 1918 marked the end of the German Empire and monarchy, but he lived past the end of the First World War, whereas Franz Joseph I died in 1916 in the middle of the First World War. As for their respective legacies, Franz Joseph I is remembered as a symbol of continuity and stability and in a rapidly changing world. While his conservative policies delayed reform, they also prolonged the survival of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So his conservatism both held things together, but also maybe prevented some necessary changes. His death in 1916 marked the end of an era, and the empire collapsed 2 years later after World War I. As for Wilhelm II, he is seen as a key figure in Germany's overreach and eventual defeat in World War I. His aggressive policies and failure to manage alliances are often blamed for the collapse of the German Empire. He lived in exile in Netherlands after abdicating, leaving a mixed legacy of ambitions and recklessness. Maybe some further thoughts. Kaiser Wilhelm II had a arm difficulties of physical deformities, for example, whereas Franz Joseph had maybe more familial struggles, such as the suicide of his son and 2 assassinations in their family. Maybe some of these, maybe the physical deformity or the family tragedies might have influenced their characters. Just some food for thought, but nonetheless, both of them and their respective empires faced similar outcomes in that they both were collapsed and were separated. But nonetheless, in terms of their character, they were really quite different. But they both came to the throne, and they were both heir apparents of the Habsburg and Hohenzollern monarchies, respectively. So they both essentially they came from the top, unlike a Napoleon figure who sort of rose to the top. But nonetheless, their characters were very much different. So as for some key differences, final key differences, their reign duration. Franz Joseph II was for 68 years from 1848 to 1919, whereas Wilhelm II was for 30 years, so less than half the length, from 1888 to 1918. However, he lived much longer past World War II, or not necessarily lived longer, but lived further in time. As for their governance style, Franz Joseph I was conservative, cautious, but autocratic, whereas Wilhelm II was impulsive, ambitious, and erratic. As for their foreign policy, Franz Joseph I was defensive, avoiding unnecessary wars, whereas Wilhelm II, but nonetheless, the assassination of his nephew still caused the First World War, whereas Wilhelm II was aggressive, provoking rivalries. As for their major conflicts, Franz Joseph I entered World War I reluctantly. As for Wilhelm II, he played an active role in starting World War I. As for the empire stability, Franz Joseph I prolonged the Austro-Hungarian Empire, whereas Wilhelm II contributed to the collapse of Germany, perhaps, or the German Colonial Empire, or the German Empire. So therefore, Franz Joseph I is often seen as a stabilizing force dedicated to preserving the Habsburg monarchy despite mounting internal and external challenges. Wilhelm II, by contrast, is remembered as a destabilizing figure whose aggressive policies contributed to Germany's downfall. Both rulers faced the decline of their empires, but Franz Joseph's legacy is often viewed more sympathetically for his perseverance, while Wilhelm II's is criticized for his recklessness. So, 2 very, very important figures manifesting their 2 important monarchies and their empires, and I think this very much helped me better understand these 2 important empires. So, and very fascinating empires and very fascinating period of history leading up until World War II and manifesting our 69th episode of Ages of Empires and fourth from last. So, thank you very much. My name is Kalen Ashcroft. This is Cashcroft TV. I'm very, very grateful for your support, and I'd be very grateful if you continue to provide it. Thank you so much.